Good evening, and welcome to Clinical Trials and Black Folks, another edition of this program. This is a monthly program that we do here on blackdoctor.org, helping you understand what are clinical trials and why it's important for people of color to get involved. In fact, the tagline of this show is involvement improves outcomes. And so that's what we're all about here, is improving the outcomes for people of color with regards to any type of procedure, treatment, medication, whatever we want to do. They get created in clinical trials. So when your doctor makes that prescription, writes that prescription, that medicine went through a clinical trial. The more involvement, and we're going to talk about this again tonight, the more involvement we have in the process of developing that medicine, the better outcomes we'll have, because we know it has been tested on and it's been proven to be effective for people of color. But if we don't get involved and your doctor prescribes you something and you say, oh, that didn't really work for me, well, you know why. Okay. So the reality is this: African Americans are about 13%, 12 to 13% of US population, but we're only about 3 to 5% of clinical trials. So we need to get our numbers up to at least match our population. I'd like it to be higher, but that's what we think. But let's get it to where we're matching our population statistics in those clinical trials and watch our health outcomes improve. So I know you didn't sign on to hear me talk. So a couple of things I want to do before I introduce you to my wonderful guest that I have today. Number one, let us know where you're watching. Drop that in the comments. We'd like to know where people are watching us from all over the world, because I know we had some people from Nigeria and South Africa. And so we got some friends across the seas. So let us know where you're watching from all over the world. Number two, if you know somebody that needs this information, please tag them. Let them know, hey, there's a great program. You might want to get this information, or just share it on your page. Those two things you can do. We always love you to like this program as well. And then finally, if you have any questions about anything that we talk about tonight, put that in the comment section and we'll try to get them asked as we move through the program. All right, so we got it. We got the instructions down. Let me introduce you to my fantastic guest. So what you're seeing is, you see the name on the screen, but this is Miss Nicole Leonard. You see, she got the alphabet soup, right? So when you see somebody with the alphabet soup after their name, you know that they're doing their thing. So let me tell you about who we're talking to tonight. So Nicole Leonard serves as the Vice President and Vice Dean of Academic Affairs at Cedars-Sinai. She oversees the academic service line, which covers research, education, and is responsible for units that cover a host of functions. These include the graduate school, pre- and post-award grants management, clinical trials, contracting and compliance, comparative medicine, research facilities, research compliance, and until just recently, the Clinical Trials and Translational Research Center. You see that? Look, bet you bad, I told you. In her more than 20 years of leadership experience, she has served as a director of research administration at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and directed the medical devices portfolio for their Office of Technology Transfer. She's a Duke graduate, and we won't hold that against her, but she's a Duke graduate, and she earned her law degree from North Carolina Central University School of Law, HBCU, shout it out, and her master's in business administration at the Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. She is passionate about increasing diversity in science and research participation. Welcome, Nicole. How are you doing?
Thank you, Ellis. I'm great. I'm really happy to be here tonight. I'm really excited about this opportunity, actually, to speak to everyone about clinical trials.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we got some folks already lining up there. So keep your cities coming. We'd like to see that. We got Columbus, we got
Yes.
Georgia, we got folks coming in. So yeah, definitely keep them coming. But I'm gonna ask the first question I'm gonna throw to you is this: when you hear the words clinical trial, what does that mean to you?
I immediately think of scientific inquiry. So for me, it's the conduct of science. You know, it's science doesn't just occur in the lab or underneath a microscope. It also happens in the clinic every day. Research happens in the clinic on people, and so the point of clinical trials is so that we can improve human health, not just cure diseases, but actually improve human health. So we do them to conduct research on drugs and devices, as well as treatments and protocols to treat various diseases. They're important because basically, if we're going to receive guidance from our doctors, we want to make sure that what we're receiving is accurate and correct, and so we test those things before they're released. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I like that. I like that science. But okay, so we know how beneficial clinical trials
Hmm.
are, and we know from the science community, and then how that translates to the general population in terms of the benefits of clinical trials. The hardest question I'll probably ask you tonight is, what do you think the biggest hurdles are? The reason why more people of color aren't getting involved in clinical trials?
I think that there are a couple of hurdles. There's mistrust. We can't pretend like there isn't.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes there is also there are hurdles to access.
Yeah.
And to be frank, there can be challenges with cultural competence and engaging with communities of color,
Right.
and meeting them where they are. And also, we see this a bit when people want to help. The people providing the help, assuming that they know already the solution to the problem that they're going in to solve, but not engaging the community that they're trying to help to really understand what the problems are. So I think that those are some of the hurdles to expanding access and engagement in clinical research from Black folks.
You know, you're absolutely right. Those are definitely a list of reasons. And then we did some surveying here on
Hmm.
Black Doctor, and one of the largest responses was they were never asked, right? And so
Yeah.
sometimes it's the simplest thing in terms of getting more people of color involved, particularly Black folks involved in
Yeah.
clinical trials, is physicians just asking, "Hey, have you thought
Yeah.
about a clinical trial?" Was particularly if somebody's been diagnosed with a new condition, right? So
Hmm.
whether even if it's something like diabetes or hypertension, there are a host of trials that are going on. There's
Hmm.
trials for women that are trying to get pregnant or of childbearing age. There's all types of clinical trials, and so just being asked and putting it on somebody's radar can go a long way to getting that involvement. But
Hmm.
we're on that other end right now. So we're talking now to people to put it on their radar, right? So the
Right.
physicians have to get it on their radar and say, we need to ask more. But patients, and when you go into your doctor's office and they're talking about a condition, you
Hmm.
say, what? Is there a clinical trial that I could get involved in? Right?
I think you're making an excellent point there, and I'll point out that most clinicians are not engaged in clinical trials, and so if you have a doctor who is not a practicing clinical scientist, so they don't open clinical trials, and most don't. That's okay. They're here to provide clinical care to you. Um, if you're not an advocate to proactively ask about these things, they may not know that there's a trial potentially open for you at an academic medical center like Cedars, like UCLA, like Duke, and other places like that. So I think you make an excellent point about people being advocates for themselves and just
Yeah.
asking, is there a trial?
Absolutely. And I know Cedars in particular has a huge, like they've got a whole
Yes.
center dedicated to clinical trials, and they're
Yes.
doing some wonderful things in terms of engaging with the community
Hmm.
that they're serving there to get more people involved. And I even
Hmm.
suggested one time that they have the doctors wear buttons on their that says "Ask me about clinical trials," right? Like you would see in the restaurant.
It's funny you say that because our cancer center did create buttons. I just saw one in my desk drawer the other day, that you wear on your jacket saying pretty much "Ask me about clinical trials." I think that that's a very easy thing for all of us to be able to do as we go out into the community if we're at academic medical centers and conducting research. Yeah.
Ultimately, I've also learned from some of the trials that they're moving to that model where they're adding more locations to
Yes.
conduct the studies, right? And so,
Yes.
can you tell us more about that process and maybe how that could attract more Black folks to getting involved?
Absolutely. If I can, I'm going to brag on one of our studies a little bit, actually, called the Barbershop Study, which was absolutely groundbreaking. It was led by the late Ron Victor, a cardiologist. He essentially scientifically tested the hypothesis of if what's that saying? If the mountain won't come to Muhammad, the Muhammad will go to the mountain. He
Right.
went out into the community in LA and was able to get barbers at 52 LA barbershops to work with him to enroll their customers, their patrons, in a
Mm,
study to monitor and try to control their elevated blood pressure. Through
mm,
this process, what happened is they deployed clinical pharmacists out to the barbershop. So you go get your hair cut. Um, while you're there, the pharmacist is there, takes your blood pressure, gives you your pills, and monitors you over time. That study showed that for a full year, those people who participated in that study were able to markedly reduce their blood pressure.
mm.
What it did was scientifically prove the effectiveness of taking medical treatment directly into the community and directly to the patrons of these Black barber shops. It was absolutely groundbreaking. And they're still studying how to. We are still studying how to grow this and make it sustainable in a larger, more impactful way. So yeah,
I love that. I love
yeah,
that. From my training is in counseling, and so
hmm
I'm thinking what we always say is meet the people where they are, right?
absolutely,
And so
absolutely,
and that sounds exactly what we were talking about is meeting the people where they are, and they're going to be in those barbershops. It's okay. You're here
yeah,
getting a haircut. Let's get your blood pressure taken, and when you come back, we'll check it again, right? And so
right,
you definitely have access, right? And
yes,
that's where it becomes ease of participation
yes,
is huge, right? Instead of, oh, I've got to get in my car and I've got to drive to
right.
the medical center that becomes problematic, right?
I'm in LA. It's just not going to happen. 10 miles is a day's drive here. Plus, not for nothing. What's really important about that model also is that you have people who trust their barber. So
Right,
if the person you trust, to line up your hair is also saying to you, hey man, why don't you consider participating in this trial? You're a little more likely to trust that kind of advice and recommendation than some white male doctor across town that you don't even know really, right? I mean, let's just be
right.
real about that. And so that's huge. I mean, I've experienced that personally in my own life with my own family. If I can share just a little anecdote,
Sure.
um, my family suffers from IBD in a very disproportionate rate. I'm gonna
IBD,
ballpark it.
help people
I'm
understand
sorry,
what
my
IBD.
bad. Yes,
Yeah.
alphabet soup. Inflammatory bowel disease.
Okay.
Um, so I'd say 40, edging up on 50% of my family, my Black family,
Right.
suffers from this. And so here at Cedars, we have an amazing clinical program and research program in IBD research and practice. And we also have one of a very, very large biorepository. So it's basically these freezers full of samples from humans that have IBD or are healthy as well, because you want to always study healthy samples versus disease samples. In any
Right.
event, we have this biobank. They've been collecting samples for 30 years. And as is common in a Black family, you always have your family reunions periodically. And
Yeah.
I have an absolutely huge family, huge family. My father was one of 18 children. So
Ooh.
yes, it's huge, absolutely huge. Between all of my living aunties and uncles, and then their kids and the grandkids, and at this point, we got great grandkids. These family reunions are absolutely huge. So I reached out to the investigator who collects these samples, and I said, "Hey, my family is getting together. If you want to send someone out, I can get them to provide samples for your biorepository for you to study." Sure enough, he sent out one of his nurses to come collect blood samples. We probably got 40, 45 members of my family to donate material so that it can be tested, so they can run genomics testing on it to be able to help study IBD. And
Right.
it really, that I think that this worked because my family trusts me. They know me when I said that this is an important way for us to contribute to science and for us to contribute to health that might one day in the future prevent my child perhaps from suffering from IBD, or prevent a generation from having to deal with this disease. That was a way that we were able to contribute.
Absolutely. So you're not just talking a talk about clinical
No,
trials. You're actually walking the walk,
absolutely.
which I think is very important, right? For all of us, especially those of us that are working around healthcare, in healthcare, is to because authentic, right?
Hmm.
And transparency are two important
Yes,
things for our community, right? And so
yes.
we want to make sure that the people that we can trust the people that are telling us what we should be doing, right?
Hmm.
With regards to our health. And so if you say, hey, look, I've done it myself, that goes a long way in towards of in engendering that trust.
Absolutely. It's critical. For what it's worth, I participate in another study as well. Every month I go across the street and get my blood drawn for another study. I think it's important. And if I'm not doing it, how can I look to my family, my friends, my community, to expect them to do it as well?
So, clinical trials were done one way for decades, right?
Hmm.
And we know about
Hmm.
the Tuskegee study. We know about that. We've heard about
Hmm.
that. If you're Black in America, I haven't heard about that. Shame on you, but we'll educate you about that. Um, what role do you think, whether it's positively or negatively, that the COVID situation created around clinical trials?
In the broader sense, I think that it was positive because we had this potentially world ending. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating there a bit, but it felt like world ending problem in front of us.
Right.
It gave us something to kind of coalesce around and everyone support. Um, I think that just like with most clinical trials, or I think it's not too much to say all clinical trials, we didn't have enough participation from the Black community in those trials, but
Mhm.
there were a few that were really targeted towards understanding different responses to that particular virus, and so I think it's overall been a good thing. But once again, we haven't had the levels of participation that we should have.
Yeah, I think you're right. Overall, because it put clinical trials in everybody's mouths, right? And
Right,
so if you weren't in healthcare or science, you wouldn't have known what a clinical trial was. You just like, look, I just need a medication.
right,
And so you didn't know how these medications came to. You said they just test them, right? You think about lab rats and stuff that you learned in
right,
high school science, and that was it. I think for a short term, though, because that clinical trial was so public and it was done so quickly, I
right.
think people expectations were skewed just a little bit in terms of, well, a clinical trial should take 5 years. Well, some do.
Right.
um, but this was it was special circumstances and extenuating circumstances that caused an acceleration, but not the acceleration doesn't mean they were cutting corners. It just
Right.
means they had the full funding to be able to conduct this trial at a faster pace than they do normally. And I think that's that messaging not being put out as much as it should have. It may have hurt clinical trials in the short run. So we got to get people to understand.
I definitely agree with you, and the key word there is messaging. The thing I kept sitting here thinking about is scientists don't tend to be very good about communicating in a way that's accessible to the public. The reality behind that you and I both know, is that there was a whole body of work that had been conducted for years
Yes.
of scientific research that had been conducted for years leading up to the creation of that vaccine for us to be able to come out of, or at least have a path out of this pandemic that we were in. And so it felt fast for the community, but there was a foundation there already. In some ways, just sitting there waiting, like put me in, coach. Sitting there waiting for it. I want to
Yeah.
make a point about participation in research that I think a lot of people don't understand or haven't really paid attention to. The reality is, a lot of us are already participating in research and don't know it because
Mm,
we've gone through these for-profit ancestry companies, right? The 23andMe's, the Ancestries.com.
mm.
And when we signed up and paid our $100 to run our DNA, we scrolled through really quickly of that terms and conditions agreement that shows up on your screen. Didn't read any of it. Embedded in those agreements is your consent for them to use your data for anything well, maybe not anything, but
Right.
pretty much for anything they want to do. And so a lot of folks are already there. You know, you found out who your half brother was that you didn't know about, but you also gave up your information to the company, who then works with, you know, they've monetized that, and works with
Yeah.
pharmaceutical companies to conduct research using your information. And I don't want to sit here and make people feel like that's a bad thing necessarily. I'm
Right.
not I'm not passing any judgment or giving an opinion on my feelings on that. I'm simply using it as an illustration to say a lot of folks are already participating in research and they don't know it
Right. And I
or
think
realize it. Yeah,
in the macro sense, and I'm
right.
making something really relatable. We're on Facebook right now. And to get your Facebook account, when
Yep.
you that same thing, you scroll through and you say accept,
Mhm.
basically Facebook can use your pictures, they can use your
Mhm.
videos, they can use whatever you put on your page, they can use that for the promotions or whatever, and you're
Yep.
agreeing to that. I think it's called an indemnity clause. You're the JD on this one, but I think indemnity is more about protections. But
Right.
you're basically saying that they can use it, and you're
Correct.
giving that you're signing away those rights. And so um, understanding that, and you're absolutely right. Ancestry, 23andMe,
Mhm.
I've been considering doing myself, but that's been a concern.
Right.
And let's not confuse that with genetic testing, because
Correct.
that is something that's completely different when you're talking about trying to find a family history or something that
Mhm.
could help in your treatment. We're just talking about when they give you that swab and you send in your DNA,
Yes.
they can use it, and
Yes.
you're saying yes, they can use it. So
That's right.
be
Yeah.
careful. Could I have there's one called blackancestry.com. Have you seen that
Yes.
one?
I have.
And so I was like, whew, but we're getting
Yeah.
we're getting out.
I don't want to malign these companies. I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm just making the point that yeah,
Absolutely, and I think they do serve a purpose because people
absolutely.
want to know about their histories, particularly Black people. So
Yeah.
if I'm not discouraging you from doing that, because we would like to know, and that's why I've been curious about doing it myself, because I'm like I want to know what region in Africa my family is from, and so
Yeah.
that was very attractive to me. And as you can see, I'm still talking about it. So
And the
as well,
reality is that the research that the pharmaceuticals are doing with the aggregate data, it will benefit us. That's
yes,
a from my estimation, that's a good thing. I just again, the point is that we're kind of already doing it and don't realize it.
yes, and you're doing
Yeah.
it with your choices. Every time
Yes.
you go to Dr. Google, or you click on something on Google, guess what? They're
Mhm.
aggregating your behavior, right? And they're
Yep.
sending that behavior because they know your ethnicity, they
Mhm.
know your age range, they know all of that stuff. And every time you click on an ad or you click on something, they say, "Oh, he
Boom.
likes this or she likes this, they
Yes.
like that," and then they sell that information to advertisers, and they
They
say,
do.
"We've got so many people that fit this demo. They're looking for this
Mhm.
product, so let's flood your ads." And that's how you get those ads. These like, why do they know
Indeed.
all these ads to put in my timeline? Well,
Yeah.
you're telling them by because they're studying your behavior.
Yes.
So it's really, and clinical trials is just one step further. It is, but it's
Correct.
actually better because it's got more controls and
Yes.
they talk to you before it's
Yes.
done, and you get to sign something called informed consent.
Yes.
And they
Very
inform
explicit
you.
informed consents.
So talk about that process and help our because we're saying yes, they just do this because we voluntarily give it up. But when
Mhm.
in clinical trials, let's talk about some of those controls, particularly the informed consent and the ability to move away or end a trial at any point in time.
Right. So there's a whole framework of laws and protections in place for the conduct of clinical research to, one, ensure that anyone who's participating in a clinical trial understands what they're entering into and has given full consent. Those informed consent forms also include explanations of what's going to happen with your data. Um, the fact that you can withdraw if you want to, how things will be handled if there's a issue related to the protocol, because it's research. We don't know that some of what we're testing is whether or not it's safe.
Right.
Um, So all of that is explained and outlined to the individuals, the patients who decide to enroll, and that's really critical just to ensure that everything that's done is done at the highest ethical standards because it does not serve anyone, the science, the community, anyone to conduct research in an unethical manner, especially given, I guess, our history, not just in the U.S. but across the world. There have been
Right.
ethical breaches, where research is concerned. Because the reality is that in order for the individual patient to trust the medical treatment that they're going to receive from their doctor, they have to understand that it was built on the back of ethical research. And if it's
Mhm.
not, then you start this sort of feedback loop where I don't trust the medical establishment because they've
Right.
done this. And so it doesn't serve my institution or any ethical research enterprise to do things that are untoward and break the trust of the patients who come in and participate, break the trust of the patients who come in and give freely and willingly of their time, their information, their
Yeah.
samples, their tumors if they have cancer, so that we can study those to make human health better in the future.
Right. Right. And that's really what it's all about. It's about access, right? So we've talked
Yes,
about that word today, but
yes,
this is about getting patients access to the latest and best treatments, the latest and best medications.
yes.
And I'm going to tell y'all a little secret. So lean in, turn your volume up on your computer. It's free. It's free. They
It
do it at
is.
no they do it at no cost to you in your for your participation. So you get access to wonderful treatments and medications at no cost to you.
Right.
Sign me up for
Uh,
that.
exactly. 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 Yeah, it's really important. I would even I want to also make the point that for some disease states, cancer being one of them, for example,
Mhm.
access to these clinical trials can extend your life in
Yes.
certain instances, or if it's not extending your life, improve your quality of life, particularly for some of these more aggressive cancers and so forth that move more quickly through our communities.
I can tell you not a personal story, but a story of a gentleman that we interviewed here on Black Doctor,
Hmm.
Mr. Mailman. He won't, 'cause we've got his video up on our YouTube page, and so he won't be ashamed of me calling his name out. But he was diagnosed with leukemia
Hmm.
and a rare form of leukemia, and the doctor told him he had, I think he said 3 to 5 years to live at that time. Today, he's still around. Over 30 years later,
Outstanding.
he is the longest living patient of that condition, and it came through a series of participation in a
Hmm.
series of clinical trials.
Hmm.
And each one improved and extended his life as he went through it. And he said some of them worked, and then he would be in this trial for 5 years, and it kept extending his life. And then he would
Hmm.
something else would come out, and he'd jump on that trial, and it just extended to the point where the medications got so good and the treatments got so good that his
Right.
life got extended. If he did not participate in those clinical trials,
Just think about how much time his loved ones have been able to have with
mhm.
him and how productive I'm sure he's been able to be in his life,
Oh,
because of
he's
those
lived a
trials. It's
fantastic life.
Yeah, yeah. That's
Yeah.
why it matters. That's why we need to be in these trials. That's why, yeah. There there are certain types of cancer, and I'll just use this as the disease that we'll talk about here. But there are certain types of cancer that disproportionately affect us as Black people, and
Yes.
there isn't any research done on them. We don't know because we don't have the participation of the people who suffer from it. I think of triple negative breast cancer, for example.
Yes.
There's so much we don't know about that. That affects Black women. That
Yes.
affects Black women. We need research in those areas, but excuse me, on that particular area of cancer, but we can't do it if we're not participating.
You look, you took it right out of my head because I was like triple
Yeah.
negative breast cancer. We
Yep.
hear about that for Black women in particular. So if you're diagnosed, if Black
Yeah.
women get it earlier in life, we've heard
Yes.
stories of women getting it as early as 20
Yep.
years old. Um, and triple negative is it's the hardest to treat, right? And
It's
so
aggressive. Yes.
very, very aggressive, and it's very deadly. And so we do need more trials. And if you get diagnosed with it, the first question after you talk about your treatment plan is, Doc, are there any clinical trials?
Yes.
Ask,
Yes.
ask, ask. We've got a video up on Black Doctor. A
Good.
young woman did that. She was in her 30s, diagnosed with triple negative
Mhm.
breast cancer, and she asked, "Are there any clinical trials?" And it saved her life.
That's
And so
fantastic.
we've got to, again, we're here. Wow, we're at the end of about 30 minutes. We could
Oh,
go.
wow, that was fast.
But I want you to give like what your final thoughts are with regards to make that plea. If a friend or a family member or a stranger on the street asks you, Nicole, why should I participate in clinical trials?
It's for our future. It's for your children's future. It's to ensure that we can potentially do away with some of the diseases that are impacting us now. Think about it for the future. Maybe it's not going to help you today, but it might help your child or your grandchild in the future.
Right. And we will let that be the last word. I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank our partners for at Cedars-Sinai for allowing us to this 30 minutes with Nicole. I want to, to put something that, because Cedars, they're also walking the walk. And so they've got a page. If you want to learn more about the clinical trials that are going on at Cedars-Sinai, it is on the screen, clinicaltrials.cedars-sinai.edu. You can learn all about the clinical trials that's going on in Cedars. If you want to learn more from blackdoctor.org, you can go to our page at blackdoctor.org. There is we've got a tab that says resource centers. You click on that and we have a clinical trials resource centers. And we've got articles and videos. The mailman that I talked about, his videos up there, and you can learn more about clinical trials and informed consent and IRBs and all these great things that they put in place for clinical trials. You can learn that on blackdoctor.org, as well as we will have some clinical trials as there that you can get directly involved in on blackdoctor.org. So we're here for you. Again, I will close. Again, this is for Nicole Leonard, for Ellis at blackdoctor.org. Remember, involvement improves outcomes. Go get involved today to improve and have a better tomorrow. And with that, we say thank you for watching and good night.
Good night.